All right, everybody, mainstream media is starting to talk a little bit more about Palantir. We're going to get right into this video. TD Ameritrade, which I guess is mainstream, maybe not all that mainstream, definitely is one of those larger media companies, definitely not as big as CNBC or Bloomberg, but it's still up there, have said Palantir is the original AI pioneer. I mean, we didn't hear about Palantir for a long time, and now as the stock is rallying, we're getting a little bit more coverage on them. So let's hear what some of the mainstream has to say about Palantir. This is a video I've never watched, 5 minutes and 57 seconds. Here is their take on Palantir as the original AI pioneer.
George Sillis is here for the disruptors here at this point because we're going to take a look at Palantir. George, so far, I mean, before I get to it, we talked about Carnival, that's up 80%, AMD up 97%, Google and Adobe up 38%. We're going to look at Oracle for after the bell, that's up 43%. And Palantir is outpacing all of them. It's up 140% this year. I mean, this is some year. What is going on, and what are you watching?
Well, I think the whole common theme, Nicole, at least for the names you mentioned, AMD, NVIDIA, SMCIs, in other words, Supermicro, that stock has been up about 200%. It's really affiliated with artificial intelligence.
That stock is also something Chris has been talking about, Finance Junkies. They got a lot of boost from NVIDIA as well. I mean, at $70, they were like in 6 PE, and they were growing 70% year over year. It was just insane.
And that's what's going on with Palantir. It's actually one of the sort of original pioneers of predictive intelligence and data analysis for the Department of Defense. In other words, its roots are really founded for military use. And so what's going on with Palantir is the company has evolved as a public company for the last couple of years. They're beginning to deploy their technologies, which were basically founded by public sector financing for the DoD. They're actually moving it more so into the private sector, and artificial intelligence is becoming ubiquitous across all industry groups. It doesn't matter if it's the medical industry group or finance or industrials, mining, infrastructure. We also know, of course, it's very much so in the technology realm, but it's going to become something that's used across the board in every industry group. And Palantir, again, is one of these companies that's a pioneer of it. Now, looking at the stock in the last year, it's done a tremendous job in terms of price action. Some of the analysts continue to be positive or constructive on the stock. For instance, Bank of America increased their price target from 13 to 18, and they actually maintain a buy rating on the name. What's going on with Palantir is that they've got so much business affiliated with the U.S. government that actually is very supportive for them to actually continue to deploy their technologies.
And again, what he's saying here is really important. Again, the ability for Palantir to have its roots in the government, as people say that's like a negative, that's actually, they've been funded by the government. So they've been able to do everything they needed to do through innovating and making mistakes, all that stuff with the DoD, the government, eventually getting good enough to win some crazy big contracts. And now they're bringing all that down to the enterprise level, which is really important. Bank of America is recognizing that the reason Palantir got IL6 makes it a pretty safe bet for a lot of organizations that want to implement AI infrastructure in a safe and ethical, meaningful way that's part of regulatory data frameworks. But a lot of other companies can't do that. And that's why this premium on Palantir and this buy rating continues to exist, because they see AI increasing. Palantir has all these roots in the government they're bringing down to the enterprise. So even as it's rallying, it still is a buy for Bank of America.
For business intelligence in the private sector. So I think this is a situation where if you look at in the last month or so, they continue to gain contracts from, for instance, the Special Operations Command Center of the U.S. Air Force. They got about a $565 million contract that was generated about a week and a half ago in terms of the news. Their sales are about $2 billion a year, and they continue to grow. The company is also guiding for sales growth about 30% compound annually through 2025. So we can see the stock has made a nice move. We can see also they are generating higher sales growth on a forward basis. And this is certainly a company that's been very interesting from the standpoint of the AI movements we've seen, of course, in the last, let's call it the year-to-date basis for sure. Looking at Palantir, though, you have to consider some of the elements behind profitability. They are expected to be full year profitable, at least on an adjusted basis, with about 21 cents a share, but it's still trading around 71 times forward earnings, and price to sales at around 15 times. So one would say maybe it's getting a little ahead of itself. There's a possibility of the stock pulling back a little bit, but nonetheless, It's been a huge winner this year, and it's a very popular stock, especially as they continue to deploy their technologies in the private sector.
And again, as he's right to say, 15 times price to sales, 71 forward PE, you could definitely see a pullback on Palantir. The question becomes, as that dip happens, where are the buyers? And what my hypothesis is that if we get a dip to 14, 13, the buyers start coming back out. Not only institutions, but retail that missed the rally as they were waiting for it to go back to 10, 11. Because if it's hovering in 13 and 14 for a long time and then Q2 numbers actually are really good, it's not going to get back to the $10, $9 ranges that people want it to get to. Now, retail might sell off the stock if it falls from 15 to 13 because a lot of people that just got into the stock for a little bit are going to have paper hands. They're going to get scared of it. But the people that wanted the dip might get the dip. And if they get the dip might not be as big of a dip as we think it could be.
All right. I mean, and also just how far ahead. I was just reading that note, just how they're, 5 years ahead, and it just really shows the footprint that they have. In the meantime, now with the stock running up, the B of A commentary raising the price target. I saw they raised it to $18, as you said. How would you go about an example trade for this, and what period of time?
Yeah, so good question. So looking at it, you can see there's a lot of implied volatility in the name. There's a lot of short interest. It's around 9% of the free float. So with that said, the overall markets look like they may end up stalling out at the 4,300. We got the Fed meeting this week and so forth, and the CPI numbers. So with that said, we could see some weakness, at least in the near term, but overall, we could also see the trend continue. So one would play some near-term weakness, but also a trend continuation, if that's the case. If for Palantir is to place a long call diagonal spread. So what we're going to do is we're going to sell the July contract, the $18 strike price. These are calls now. And then we're going to actually use those proceeds to finance the acquisition of the in-the-money $14 calls for August. So altogether, this would cost a trader about $2 a share or $200 a contract. So if you think there's going to be at least some near-term weakness, and of course, the implied volatility is extremely high in the near-term options, but you also think that there'll be a longer-term continuation pattern here for Palantir as well as some of the other AI stocks. This is certainly a trade you could consider. Now,
all right, so what he talked about, there was a call debit spread. We're not going to talk too much about that. Call debit spreads are a little bit more complicated, but ultimately he's saying it's bullish. He thinks the company can get to $18 by August, especially because Bank of America put out that price target. And as a result of that, that's where you've got Palantir and their price direction going from this trader's perspective. We're not going to watch this video, but I just want to show you the headline. Gene Munster, who is at Deepwater Asset Management, also said 6 days ago on CNBC, Google, Palantir, and Meta are great companies to ride the AI wave. And Gene Munster is one of those analysts on CNBC that a lot of people respect. He's not full of crap like some of the other analysts. So it's nice to see his name being associated with Palantir. Which begs the question, why are all these analysts starting to talk more about Palantir? Why is the mainstream media giving them a little bit more attention? And I think, honestly, the report we got from Bank of America yesterday is starting to validate a lot around what the mainstream media is thinking around Palantir, which is that it is a company that is not only benefiting from AI, they're benefiting from implementing AI infrastructure after speaking with their clients, and that there's just not that many other companies out there that can do it. And if there's not that many other companies out there that can do it, then it ultimately becomes a question of, are you going to wait, or are you going to get into the company, when it's at $30 when are you going to initiate a position? And a lot of people are saying that it might just be time, even if it may be a little bit overvalued if we're looking at some of the fundamentals. Dan Ives, another big analyst, says today, NVIDIA biggest cap tech guidance range, including bubble of 1999 period ever, Accenture going to 80,000 AI employees. That's also a big deal we'll talk about eventually. Jensen, Nadella, Ellison, Su, Sundar, Zuck, Musk, Siebel, Benioff, Karp, among many other lasers focused on AI, but it's just hype. You all say, got it, makes sense. So there you go, Dan Ives name dropping Alex Karp in the same with Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, Benioff, the Salesforce guy, Tom Siebel. You've got Sundar Pichai, Google. So even Dan Ives is putting Karp in the same bucket, saying, hey, these guys are thinking about AI in a fundamentally different way than the rest of you guys. They're playing chess, not checkers. They understand where the market's going. They've been building and preparing for this moment. And this is the time to bet on these companies, not bet against these companies. Now, that may be short-term still overvalued to some extent, especially with growth not being up there. But the question becomes, as I said, if the dip goes to the dip, do you buy the dip or do you wait for a greater dip? And I think everyone waiting for the greater dip might just not happen if the market wants AI exposure and Palantir in Q2 is able to get some better results than what they've guided for. And you've got more and more clients saying that the AIP platform is the real deal and it's just 5 years ahead of all the competition. You're going to get a lot more mainstream coverage. You're going to get Dan Ives, Gene Munster, TD Ameritrade speaking more publicly about Palantir being an original sort of pioneer of AI, simply because there's not that many names out there. And if you're going to talk about companies in the AI space and there's not that many out there that have still small valuations in comparison to like Nvidia, Tesla, etc., well, then you've got Palantir. So those are my thoughts. Mainstream media talking a little bit more about Palantir. Let me know your thoughts on what you think about more media coverage on the company. Thanks so much for listening and watching. Please subscribe to dailypalantir.com/subscribe, my email newsletter every day for Palantir investors. I'll see you on the next one.